Europeans are preparing for a real war in Rome and a phony peace. Meanwhile, back on the actual front lines, and in preparation for that, the Ukraine side is preparing to throw teenagers into the slaughterhouse next. This kind of perversion is just hard to fathom. And one of the reasons we're making this episode today is because there's too much focus on what a lot of the European leaders say, what Volodymyr Zelensky says, what the Russians say, what the Americans say, et cetera, and we forget about what happens on the front line. Too many times I tell you that the bill payers for all of this fraud are the Ukrainian people. Well, now then it's turning out that it's not enough, that it's just a lot of the, first of all, the older part of the population, a lot of the older men who just can't carry the burden. Then they were trying to go down even into the 18 to 24-year-olds. And now then they're actually actively preparing teenagers, some as young as 15 and 16, as I understand. We'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, let's start off with what has been going on at some of the headlines and what was happening in Rome and also in Asia between the United States and Russia, because all of this plays together. All of it has a lot to do with what's happening here. First of all, let's start off with there was a lot of comments you may have seen in ASEAN that we talked about it in our show earlier today. Recommend you go and watch that for more details. But Secretary of State, I almost said Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Sergey Lavrov briefly on the side. You see them actually talking right there before one of the meetings began. And a lot of the headlines that came out of that were that there was something new, that Rubio said to reporters afterwards that he has some new ideas that he got from the Russian side. And he had to take that back to the United States to talk to the president to find out what was going to happen. Well, as you might guess, there was folks in both Washington and Moscow, once the two leaders got back, that were wondering to know, hey, what actually happened with this? What is new? Because no one had heard anything new so far. So first, let's go and see what Sergey Lavrov said, and has a little tongue-in-cheek response here, which is probably not too surprising.
Yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated following negotiations with you that a certain new plan for Ukraine had been discussed. Which side proposed these new approaches? What do they entail? And how do they fundamentally differ from previous ones? Does the supply of American weapons also factor into these plans? Was this discussed? I'd like to respond with the words of Donald Trump. He said, like I'd tell you that, expect big surprises. I don't know about big surprises, but you understand, being familiar with diplomatic work and often accompanying us, that there are things that are not commented on. Yes, we discussed Ukraine and reaffirmed the position articulated by President Putin, including once again on July 3rd of this year, during his conversation with President Trump.
And as we've talked about in an earlier show today, whereas it's actually kind of common for the Russians to say, well, we don't talk about active diplomacy and active negotiations in public. We prefer to do that in private, which used to be the way it worked. But he did, though, say toward the end of that, you heard there, he mentioned the July 3rd comment. So that was also reported in Russian media overnight, where they said, yes, Sergey Lavrov reiterated President Putin's comments from the phone call between Trump and Putin on July the 3rd, in which he laid out Putin laid out his requirements to end the war. And he said the bottom line is that all of the root causes have to be addressed, and we will not budge from our position here. And that was a direct rebuff of President Trump, who had made the call saying that he wanted an unconditional ceasefire, or ceasefire of any sort at all. And Putin just categorically said, I'm not going to do that. So that, of course, over time, the more Trump thought about it, the more people asked him about it, started getting him more and more angry. So now then we have here Lavrov and Rubio meeting, and he implies there's something new. So that would, perk up the ears of anybody who follows the State Department. And certainly in the press briefing with Tammy Bruce, that question definitely came up.
Are you able to tell us at all about this? What's new about these ideas or comments that is going to open a path.
What the secretary said was that he would bring the new ideas to the president. We didn't say that they were going to open a path for peace. So don't read into
Isn't
the nature.
that what you guys are trying to do?
Well, and that is in the process of the diplomacy that the secretary undertakes, that he's in a conversation with Lavrov as an example, conversations the president would have with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine as an example. These are things that are important to realize. They're not static events that stand on their own. They are part of a fluid dynamic of conversations and negotiations. We are, as the president has said and the secretary has said and engaged in, we'll speak with everyone because every step makes a difference in the decision that you have to make in the end.
Okay. I mean, good enough as far as that goes. As I said, I mean, this is at least an improvement over the previous administration that didn't talk to anybody. You may recall that that time when we showed you toward the end of the Biden's term, where Anthony Blinken mocked the idea of talking to Sergey Lavrov. He goes, I mean, I've seen him on the side of a couple of conferences, but I'm not going to talk to him. Like, what a ridiculous thing to say. So at least as far as that go, President Trump gets some props for their having some talks. But that reporter asked a pretty good question there. Isn't this supposed to lead to a negotiated settlement? And you noticed even Tammy Bruce there, when she says new ideas, I have no idea why she would put air quotes on that. That's what he said. There shouldn't have been air quotes. It was actual quotes. He said there's some new ideas. And the whole point of having these negotiations, of having discussions, is to get to an end. President Trump has campaigned on it. He has repeated it every time he talks that he's looking for a negotiated end. So it's unclear why you're saying don't read into that. It's heading towards a negotiated settlement, because that's what we're supposed to be trying to do. So it's unclear first of all, from the Russian side, they're not saying whatever these new ideas were, but they do acknowledge that there were some discussions along that route. But then they camped out publicly and openly on the root causes and the July 3rd commentary from President Putin. So they're telling you that whatever these new ideas aren't changing the fundamentals that they say, which is, not a ceasefire, but militarization, denazification, territory being exchanged, all the standard things that they've said. And of course, Russia continues to move forward offensively, where they have said, and I think it was also part of that phone call on July 3rd, where Putin said, we're going to continue to talk, but we're also going to continue to fight until it is a time we reach some sort of an agreement. And until that time, if there's not one, then we're going to keep fighting. And Putin was apparently very polite, but very clear that that's where he's going to go. Well, that has since not set well with President Trump. Apparently, he thinks that his force of personality, as so many people that are underneath him tell him how good his force of personality is. I think he expected Putin to actually take action that was antithetical to his own interests and that would be beneficial to the Western side, but Putin's not going to do it. So there was some comment that President Trump made when he talked on NBC News last night. I actually did a phone interview with Kristen Welker, and in that place, in that interview, he said that he's going to have a big announcement on Monday, and he's not very happy. And by the way, he's now starting to go ahead and give interceptor missiles and other kinds of defensive weapons to Ukraine, which is going back on what he said he was going to do. Well, today he was asked about that, actually just hours ago. And they said, hey, what do you think about this current situation with Russia?
Russian drones hit a maternity hospital in Ukraine overnight. I know. You'll be seeing things happening.
So that if you couldn't hear the reporter there, apparently there was in one of the overnight drone attacks, there's the claim that a maternity hospital was hit by the Russian side, and you see Putin or Trump sitting there saying, yeah, I'm not happy with that, and something's coming on Monday. I think it's pretty clear by context that he's going to unload a new round of sanctions. I mean, he's already publicly said that they're going to start giving more interceptor missiles to the Ukraine side, and that's really the only card left he's got to play. And Lindsey Graham has been begging him to do it for months. And he's a golfing buddy of President Trump, and there was Gary had a soundbite early this morning of a bunch of different senators who were all enthusiastic behind this. So I think it's pretty clear, and that was just from yesterday. I think it's pretty clear that that's what he's going to say on Monday. I'm not sure how much he's aware of how little that's going to have any impact on things. Because if you hand a few more interceptor missiles or a few more artillery shells, which we probably don't have to give, but I guess we can dip down even further into our strategic reserve of what we're supposed to have for our national defense. And if you slap some more sanctions on Russia, they've already got thousands of them as it is. They have learned how to live without them. So none of that is going to make any difference on the ground. And it's just going to reinforce to the Russian side that the only thing left is to just fight until they conquer everything that they want on the battlefield. So it may eventually have a opposite outcome of what President Trump thinks is going to happen. And that's unfortunately going to make us look even weaker. And that President Trump couldn't compel either Europe to change their plans, couldn't compel Zelensky to reach a negotiated settlement, and couldn't compel Putin to stop his onslaught, and then ended up losing. I mean, that's where this is headed. And I'm not sure that the president's being well advised, because people should be telling him that there is a real cost to going down this path. But it seems like instead they're building him up to thinking, no, your force of personality is going to make a difference where nobody else could. And, he gets lathered up with that all the time. And I think it has the effect that after a while he believes it. Now that when he didn't get his way, how dare Putin not do what I want? He thinks he's going to do something else, but it's going to have the opposite effect. But we'll have to wait and see how that part comes out, and we'll find out what does happen on Monday. Certainly, we'll be bringing that to you. Let's then go back to Rome, because while President Trump is trying to show his dissatisfaction with Russia for not doing what he told him to do, in Europe, they're continuing down a path they were. And as I mentioned at the outset here, they are talking about funding and doing things that actually really do facilitate and extend the war, while going after a verbal peace that has no basis in reality at all. Meaning the net is all they're doing is funding and extending the war. Here's how Keir Starmer put it.
It's also right that we lead the response on Ukraine. Later today, Emmanuel and I will bring the coalition of the willing together again to rally even more support to keep Ukraine in the fight for now, and to drive Putin to the negotiating table.
Dude, that's like the perfect encapsulation of what I said there. He is extending the war, and he's even used that exact phrase, or nearly that exact language. We want to keep them in the fight. And so they're going to give them enough stuff. Apparently, the British have offered 5,000 interceptors, but that's over an extended period of time. So don't get too excited about that number, because a lot of it is years away from when that could actually materialize. But whatever they're able to give, and whatever Trump is adding to that list now, and whatever any other European nations, because apparently also last night, President Trump said that we're going to, I guess, sell some of these missiles and possibly even a battery to NATO, and then NATO would funnel it on. I don't know why he thinks that makes a difference, but other than he's saying NATO's going to pay for it, if he's worrying about the cash on it, okay, I guess he can do that. But that still doesn't change the fact that that's depleting our reserves that we have here. But it also, as I talked in detail in the earlier show today, is not going to make any difference at all in the air war, which Russia has already decisively won. And you just can't reverse that in the course of this one war. It's just not going to happen, because Russia continues to accelerate its capacity in the air, and we can't come close to matching that in defensive capability. So it's not going to work, but it will extend the war a little bit longer, and it will keep Ukraine alive, like somebody on an IV in an ICU. They have the machine. It'll keep them breathing for now, but the body is still continuing to deteriorate. That's on the one hand. Then he has this phony piece on the other hand, where he says we are going to force Russia into a peace. That's what he wants to do. So the intent is we don't like the conditions that are being set by the Russian side, that are being leveled by the Russian side. Back to that 12-point plan Gary keeps showing you from the last Istanbul meeting. And so we're just going to pretend they don't exist, and we're going to force Putin into an outcome that we want. And once we have done enough to force him, then he'll be able to have a peace, which, by the way, we still have it. If Russia at least has detailed this 12-point peace proposal, which is very specific, the Western side has done nothing beyond the bumper stickers. We don't even know for sure what they would accept, what they think is out there. And I think that's intentional, but it's also very illustrative of just how phony this whole operation is. The intent clearly is to just keep the war going on by any means. Now, I keep talking to you about that. A lot of the bill payers, not the primary bill payer for this, are the Ukrainian people. Keep that in mind about to what you're about to see. But first of all, I want to go back to the actual floor in Rome, where Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, was very happy today, along with all of the people in attendance.
I can announce €1 billion payment in macro-financial support, dear Volodymyr. I can also announce a payment of more than €3 billion from the Ukraine facility. And these guarantees and grants that we are signing here today, you said it, Georgia, and you said it, Volodymyr, it's outstanding. They are set to unlock €10 billion in investment for growth, recovery, and reconstruction of Ukraine. And we will ensure that Ukraine is supported until 2028 and beyond, when the new European budget kicks in.
So much applause. Yay, we'll stretch this sucker all the way up to 2028 and beyond, she adds in there for dramatic effect. And everybody's just clapping and cheering, smiles all over the place like somebody just won the lottery. Because in a certain sense, I think that's the objective, is to win the economic lottery. Because nobody in Europe is dying. Nobody in Rome is dying. Nobody in Britain is dying. In fact, they're getting cash. They're spending a lot of money, but they're also making a lot, at least for the industrial capacity and their arms industries all over Europe. So cool for them. That's what it's all about. And you see them talking about everything about money, about cash, about billions of euros for all this and stuff, because that's where they're at. And then on paper, as Starmer said right before that, they want to force Russia into a peace. When you hear that phrase, that reminds me of something that we heard on our channel just yesterday. If you've been seeing that, and a former Russian fighter and current journalist, George Memserov, was on our show, and we asked him about that very issue of being forced into a peace. And of course, you can expect that anybody on the Russian side would say, "Oh, well, they're not going to force us into a peace." Well, he went a little bit further than that, and he said, "Okay, if you want to force us into a peace, there's something that has to happen on the ground."
To make Russia to obey to some other conditions imposed by Europe, you have to win in a military way. You have to break our army and impose this by force. But as we see at the moment, it has not been achieved in the slightest manner. So we've not been broken, we've not been beaten. We don't listen to European ideas because they can't impose them to us.
So that's the current situation. Now, what is the prospect that a few more $1 billion, a few more air defense missiles, and presumably some other armored vehicles? Haven't seen any announcements of that, but that would certainly have to happen, because even though the drones are taking over a major portion of this conflict, you still have to have armored vehicles to move around the battlefield and get people up to the line, because until you have infantrymen on the line to either take or defend land, drones and missiles and everything else are not going to do it. It always comes down to the manpower. It's not machines. It's not money. It's men. We cannot get past that, because no matter, we're talking about wars into antiquity and up to the current date, the World War II, the Vietnam, Korea, Desert Storm, all of those things, it's still to this day comes down to manpower. And that is the thing that we keep talking over and over and over for a very good reason. It doesn't make any difference how much money you can bring to bear if you don't have the manpower and the trained manpower in order to use it. Now, as Julian Rupke, the German journalist who said on that we showed a show of on 1 July, there is a big problem on that front for Ukraine.
I think of big concern, because I do not see sufficient Ukrainian efforts to stop the Russians there. Again, the Russians advancing with a lot of drones, with a lot of airstrikes, but without tanks, without APCs, without BTR or BMP, all these vehicles which we have seen in the past and being destroyed in big numbers. I think the Russians there found the weak spot with the Ukrainian defense, and the weak spot, and this was also stated by, as you saw, some former Mariupol defenders just recently, the weak spot is that there are parts of the front line, as he says, where 5 kilometers are guarded by 12 Ukrainian soldiers. And this is a massive problem. This infantry problem at the first line is a massive problem where the Russians, although they are losing killed and wounded 1,000 a day, I think that's still true. They have more personnel, and in the end they have more soldiers, more meat, as some Ukrainians say, to advance and capture village after village. Because even if many of them are getting killed, if you really have only, I wouldn't say 12 defenders on 5 kilometers, but let's say 12 defenders per village every 3 kilometers. This is not enough. This is simply not enough, and Russians are overrunning these villages one by one.
So that was on 1 July. And now that's been happening. We've been showing you tactical updates really for the duration of the time we've been on this show. And you can see Russia continues to move forward. Gary, I'm not sure I asked you at the beginning, but do you have that chart that shows how much territory that the Ukraine side has been losing this year? I sent that early. If you can, just pop it up whenever you get it. But this just shows graphically going back to, I want to say it was November of last year. That was kind of the high water mark since October of 2023, where the Russians had gone on to the offensive, and they started a so far unbroken chain of where they took more territory than the Ukraine side did, and they have held on to it. So it's been a net positive, a net gain of territory for the Russians since that time. I want to say it was 700 some odd square kilometers that were taken by the Russians in that month. You saw it now. Thank you, Gary. In January, it went down during the winter months. I guess they slowed down some of the operations, and Russia was doing some retooling, it appears. But then starting in April, it started going back up. Then back into May, another record for year 2025. Then June was back up to 556. So Russia continues to move up, and they continue to increase the pace, both of the amount of territory they gain, but more critically, of the number of Ukrainian soldiers that they destroy. And the number of losses and irretrievable losses, which is both severely wounded that can't return to the fighting and those that are killed in action, continues to go up for the Ukraine side. As you've heard Doug McGregor say on our show a number of times, even by historical standards, in the latter stages of wars, the casualties for the losing side seem to go up because they have fewer trained people. They're just throwing more men into the gaps to try and prevent the other side from winning, and the onslaught just continues on. And that's it appears to what we're seeing right here. Well, now there's something even a little bit more graphic, and that is this video that I found today that shows a documentary about the fact that that's it right there. It's called Teens of War. You can Google that and find if you want to watch the whole video. But this is really, really disturbing. These are teenagers. They're not even old enough yet for the draft. And yet, as you're going to see in this clip we're going to play here, what you're about to see, they have just shown a section where they're trying to put on they taught themselves how to put on a tourniquet, which I did myself before every deployment I had. We'd go through self-medical training and how to train for your buddies. And you'll see on this video that they actually teach them how to put it on themselves, because there's the risk that there might not be anybody around alive if you get wounded. So they're doing that. And then it extends into what comes next in the training.
Once they get the basics down, the chaos begins. There's yelling, people are bleeding, drones overhead. It's the same drills, but now closer to real-life speed and intensity.
So you can see that these are kids. These are kids that should be worrying about going to the mall or maybe who they're going to go to the prom with this year. What they're going to do maybe when they graduate in a couple of years from now, going into college and all that stuff. And instead, they're going through some really rigorous, tough training for war. And listen, I've gone through this stuff myself. I had 4 combat deployments myself, and we were constantly trained, especially when it came trying for deployment. You would ramp that stuff up, and I can just tell you that that's actually really good training that they're getting there. That is very realistic training. It's something I've seen in the past in the United States, like when we were in World War II and big wars. The training was very tough, and my own training before, especially Desert Storm, which is when I was in a big unit that went in and fought a tank battle. We got that same kind of training and made it as realistic as possible. And it looks like the Ukraine side really doing that. And that's great for its defenders. But the fact that you're training kids how to fight tells you that we're getting toward the end. You've heard the reports that there were, like a year ago, that they had, I think the average age was like 43 or something like that, because there were so many older men that because they'd ran out of the primary age guys that they needed. So they were grabbing what they could, but they were trying to stay away from the lower end. Now then they're going to the 18 to 24-year-olds. Many reports that I've heard from Ukraine were that many parents and mothers especially were terrified of their kids who were getting close to 18 years of age, and they were fleeing the country to get out. Well, obviously all of them aren't, because now they have these training for teenagers. And if you're training teenagers with this kind of intense training, that tells you they think that they're going to be used. And this is what you don't see with those big applause with Ursula von der Leyen or Zelensky when he makes these rhetorical flourishes and talks about defense and whatever, freedom and all this kind of stuff. They keep having this fiction that the war can be won, when every dynamic, every historical precedent tells you that they're not going to, when the fundamentals are irrevocably against them. And I put a lot of blame on Volodymyr Zelensky, because he's the one who has the ultimate deciding on whether the Ukraine side fights or whether it takes the diplomatic off-ramps. And he will be crucified, I think, in historical fierce assessments when they look back and they find all the places that he could have ended the war or could have prevented it and chose not to. That's on him. Then that's something that'll have to be dealt with by the Ukrainians themselves. But then there's the bigger picture that should worry all of us in the West, and that is that the Western side, really writ large, only a couple of exceptions to this, especially at the leader level, they still keep going down this fictitious path that this is about freedom and democracy, and, well, we can't let Russia win, and they're coming after us, etc., when there's no path to a success. There's not even a path to success. Victory is not even on the table, hasn't been almost from the beginning, certainly not since 2022. But you keep going down this path here, and you keep just shoveling Ukrainian bodies in. Entire generations are being wiped out. The future of Ukraine is being wiped out. They're physically in Rome talking about rebuilding, like there's some kind of positive future and they want a Marshall Plan and all that, but they're oblivious to the fact that there's not going to be anybody left to live in it. You are killing so many people that you have wiped out entire generations, or brought them down to the bare minimum. It is when you look at the demographic situation in Ukraine right now, it is a bleak situation, because you don't have enough men left over to have a birth rate that's going to sustain and grow the population, even sustain it, much less grow it. So that right now, especially if you don't have a mass influx of people coming back whenever the war is over, however it comes out, you're going to have a real problem sustaining the existence of the state in the decades to come, because you've lost so many of the male population. That is a real problem. No one, even the West, seems to care about it, much less even address it. And in fact, to the contrary, they're continuing to worsen the future of Ukraine by shoveling in additional generations of men and just thinning out even what's already on the table there. This is egregious, folks. This is so horrible. And and what makes it even worse is that the Western side doesn't even offer anything more than bumper stickers of why they're going down this path. See, if they said, okay, we think that we have a chance to force Russia to a better negotiating position for our side, and here's how we plan to do it. First, we're going to do this thing, and then we're going to deprive Russia of that thing, and then we're going to, with this number of artillery pieces and tanks and missiles and aircraft, whatever, we can cause this kind of damage, which is going to cause specific collapse of X, Y, and Z in Russia, and then the expansion on our side. And if it works out good enough, then this can start to roll Russia back, and then that's going to cause this problem. And then you see there's a plausible path to where that he would be willing to have a negotiated settlement from a position of weakness that we can live with. If they said that, then maybe you could parse it out. Now, I think they haven't said that because there is no such rationale that can be drawn, because you can't do it. I've looked, I've considered it. Because I'm like scratching my head wondering, do they know something I don't know? Maybe I need to relook this and consider, well, maybe there is something they can do. But see, the irrationality of even that hypothetical situation I just drew there is that they say, okay, we want to change the dynamics on the battlefield so that Russia, from a position of weakness, will recognize they can't win the war and then have a negotiated settlement, oblivious to the fact that they themselves are in that position right now and are not willing to have a negotiated end from a position of weakness. Now, if they're not willing to have a negotiated settlement from a position of weakness where they are now, by what logic do you think that the other side would have that kind of willingness? You see, it can never be successful. That is what is, no one wants to talk about this in the Western media anywhere, in any country that I've seen. What I'm laying out for you folks here is the absolute logic, or maybe a better way to put it is the illogic and the absence of any sort of fundamentals that are behind these cheering scenes you just saw in Rome, and of President Trump about to deepen our mistakes of giving now more of our weapons and more of our ammunition, and then throwing more sanctions and thinking that's going to change anything, when all the evidence screams that the missiles won't make any difference because Russia can saturate the fire anyway. So they'll just fire more missiles, more drones to saturate whatever additional interceptor missiles you may put. It's just not going to make any difference. They'll just counter it, and they can, and they are. It's physically happening already. It's not even a hypothetical possibility. They're doing it right now. And then these sanctions, of course, Russia's made itself sanctions proof, and they're mocking us for even thinking that. But don't you see, in the absence of any kind of logic, we're just going with emotion. Trump's mad because Putin didn't listen to him. Ursula von der Leyen is incensed that, that our preference isn't working now, because that's how it's been for the last 80 years. Whatever our preference is, everybody else was too weak to do anything about it. So our way worked. And if you didn't like it, hit the road, don't care. And if you didn't like it, you couldn't do anything about it anyway. So we still got our way. That created an entire generation of leadership across the Western world right now that cannot see beyond the end of their nose, because now then mentally they can't recognize that there is a reality, and now then the other side can do something about it, and they are. And we are ready to condemn the children of Ukraine to pointless and certain death, because this war is not going to be won by the Ukraine side. You are not going to compel Russia into a piece of your preference. And the longer that you try to go down that path, the deeper the loss will be, the more Ukrainians will die, the more territory will be lost. And in the end of the day, it's unclear that there's going to be a viable Ukraine entity politically left over. You may be laying the foundation for a much stronger Russia than ever existed prior to 2022. And this categorical loss here. Now, I have to say this out loud. It is plausible, and there is some circumstantial evidence to support the theory that there are plenty in the West who know everything I've just said and are fine with it. And if they sacrificed all of Ukraine, and if they sacrificed hundreds of thousands in the millions, they're okay with that, because at the end of the day, then they will be the first ones in line, watch for this, who will be screaming alarms from the rooftops, from Paris, from Rome, from Spain, everywhere, all different places. Maybe not Spain, actually, because they're not so keen to this, but certainly in Brussels. This behemoth, this Russia now is so strong, and they're definitely coming for us now. You saw they just conquered the entire Ukraine. My God, we have to arm up quickly. Maybe 5% is not enough. We have to go higher, and we have to build up all this military power. That's what's going to happen. None of this needs to happen. And of course, if we go down that path, then the whole security dilemma issue enters in, and Every increasing rise by one side is mirrored on and then accelerated on the other side, and then it keeps going up. And then the chance for this thing to do what I've worried about from day one, which is expand into a regional or European war that could all too easily go nuclear. That has been my biggest fear. And we right now are sprinting to that very outcome. And if something doesn't happen pretty quick to where somebody sobers up and wakes up and does whatever it takes to get this war off the table, we're making that more and more likely as our outcome. I'm giving this to you. It's kind of an alarm. Friday afternoon is not a normal good day for this kind of stuff, but the circumstances are what they are, and we got to bring you whatever happens today. But that's where we are, folks. That's the danger of this. So when you see all these happy comments and raucous applause and happy smiles everywhere in Rome, and then you hear all these strong words coming from Trump, and you can just predict it. The mainstream media will be reporting on this, and especially those on the right side will be patting Trump on the back and saying, yeah, he's finally getting tough. He's finally being strong. Understand that we are undermining our own security left and right. Our own stocks are going down. Our capacity is diminished, and we are doing everything to make sure that our potential adversary in Russia continues to ramp up and get stronger, and likewise prepare itself for a potential clash with us. And of course, in the middle of all that are the Ukrainian people. I want this war to be over because I actually care about the Ukrainian people. Unlike the majority of those who claim to want to help them and claim to want to support them, all they're doing is predictably getting more of them slaughtered. That's just the truth of it. I don't care what anybody likes. I don't care if that makes anybody unhappy. That is the truth. That is the reality. And we're seeing it playing out right before your eyes right now. That's all we have for you today, folks. Appreciate you joining with us today. Bit of a somber episode here, but it's the truth. We're unintimidated and uncompromised. It's what we do. You deserve to know the truth, even when it's this. And at least if you're armed with the truth like this, then you know that what's at stake here. Maybe you can take some action. Maybe you can raise your voice on social media, elsewhere, any way that you want to do it that's peaceful. This is the time, folks. Because before we get to that point of no return, now is the time. Now is the opportunity to do something about it. And I encourage you to do whatever you can within legal means that you have. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.